Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to Levitum Knot 19. We're continuing our travel series. Last week was the Himalayas, and this week Aditya is going to be talking about his travels to the land of the Rajputs, to the home of the Rajputs. So, Aditya, take it away.
Hi all. So yeah, we took a short vacation to what is technically my wife's ancestral land. However, the trip was her first trip to Rajasthan itself. So we sort of spent a lot of our time just relaxing and sort of being tourists and sightseeing, and going where the Rajputs were, or used to be, anyways. So here's a quick photo tour of the place. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know when you see it. Do you happen to see it?
You see a screen.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Do you see the photo in the center?
The bottom right.
Oh no, that's not what it should show you. 1 second.
So, Raj, Vishnu, have you guys been to Rajasthan?
We were supposed to go last year, so that thing.
No, I haven't visited. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so by the time I bring this up, so I'll give you a little bit of history. So we went to Jaipur first, and Jaipur, we were there for a couple of days. So our first day was spent at this essentially at a little place called Meghnivas. I don't have pictures for that. It's a little old, it's a old army couple who have converted their ancestral home into a hotel, and that is essentially what became our hotel for the next sort of. I think we were there for 15. Just about 15 hours grand total, given that we spend most of our time out and about in town. So I don't know why this is refusing to share my screen with you guys. Guys, I might just have to disconnect and reconnect. Give me a second.
No worries, go ahead. Yeah, so I'd gone to Rajasthan, I think it's more than 10 years back. I think I went there in 2002, I think, or 3 December. So, I think I went from Delhi to Rajasthan to Jaipur. Spent about 3-4 days in Jaipur. And then from Jaipur, we went to Ajmer, and then Ajmer to Pushkar. So, pretty interesting trip. And I went there in December. Weather was great. Stayed in some old heritage hotel slash palace type place. Amazing food. Can't imagine going there in summer though.
Sorry, when did you say you went, Avi? Which
I
season?
went in December.
December.
I think December 2002. I think.
Cold?
Not too. No, not cold really. Pleasant.
Hey, Greg. I'm back. Do you happen to see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so the background, right? So we were there for a couple of days. Didn't really spend much time at the hotel. So Pooja and I, that is my wife and I, we both love to sort of go out and about, see the town. So our itinerary was such that we arrived in the afternoon and spent the rest of the day sort of seeing the city palace, the famous Hawa Mahal, and the sites about their vicinity. So essentially, the history of Jaipur is such that it's been ruled continuously by a single dynasty for more than 500 or 600 years. And Jaipur city itself was founded about 300 years ago. The current family still lives in the palace. However, they've taken a small portion of the palace and made it, open for viewing to the public. And when you go there and you pay for the ticket, you're essentially paying the royal family to see their place, or their palace, sorry. um, so the first photo I'm showing you is of this little room, you can call it, a little apartment that's right in the center of their courtyard, which houses a textile museum. Unfortunately, I can't show you any pictures of that because photography there is not allowed. But essentially, it houses a variety of clothing from royalty, which they have worn over the last 150 years, I believe. And so essentially, all the Hindi TV serials you see where the women are decked up to the top and the men are wearing all of these crazy sherwanis with lots and lots of gold work on it, and you think it's only made for TV. Well, actually, it was also made for royalty. It's true, they all wore it. And one of the most fascinating pieces we saw was this absolutely huge, huge sort of overcoat, Indian style, which is not like the Nehru Bangala, which is actually a very new thing, but more a achkan. I don't know if there's an English translation for that, but it's essentially worn by this guy called Jagat Singh. He was the king of Jaipur some 80, 90 years ago, and he was an incredibly large man, a 7-foot tall guy with huge shoulders. The amount of fabric that went into that took up an entire display window from one end of the wall to the other end of the wall. It was this huge man, and they had lots and lots of these incredible amounts of gold on it. I'm sure the gold weighed more than the jewelry many women wear. So in any case, that was a fun little beginning to the royal tour. What you see are going to be a series of pictures inside the palace. This is a huge pot made of silver to carry Ganga Jal. So essentially, the king of Jaipur would make these trips down to the Ganga and would fill these pots with water and carry them with him when he went on tours, where he essentially, say, to England or wherever he wanted, and the water would travel with him. So that gives you an idea of the extravagance. While we were there, they were preparing for some sort of a function. I didn't realize what it was till later. I'll come back to that story. So we'll continue down. So there you go. That's me standing there. And right behind me, you can see a bunch of flowers being put up on the walls. So in the background, that's the entrance to the actual living quarters of the family. And the family was preparing for a function where some very important local dignitaries were expected. So we happened to see the preparation for that. Okay, so this is where the story gets interesting. What you see here is the family tree of the current ruling family, and the family doesn't celebrate Diwali like the rest of us do. We were about a week away from Diwali when we were there, and they celebrate what they call Black Diwali. So the entire family wears only black clothing at the time of Diwali to commemorate a sort of black day in their history. So the story goes that the current ruling clan, the Kachawas, were minor nobles in the princely state of Mewar, and they were given refuge by the Meena king, who was in the area of Jaipur. As the child grew up, he lost his father, and his mother and he were taken care of by the Meena king. He happened to be sent away for education to another princely state, where he met and sort of found an advisor of his own, who advised him that he, on a certain day, when the Meenas sort of throw away all their weapons on the days of Diwali and are essentially sort of concentrated in the city of Jaipur doing their prayers, that he should attack them because he had their confidence and take over the kingdom. So he did exactly that, murdered all the relatives and everybody of the Meena who had been taking care of him, and through this act of deceit became the king of the area that is now Amer or Jaipur. So essentially, that's the last vestige of them remembering that act is them wearing black in Diwali. Um, Fairly interesting history, but we'll come to them later. So the whole story of Jaipur, and as being history buffs, we loved hearing all of it. Lots of questionable exploits and things, but a lot of extravagance as well. So what we see is the Hawa Mahal, the very famous Hawa Mahal. It's on the outside, bordered by this incredibly busy bazaar, and the inner courtyard is essentially another palace wing, which is the Zanana wing, where the women of the family lived in Parda, which is essentially, no men can see them except the king, and the king would see them one at a time as his concubines, etc. So, but it was, fun to see, and the rest of the time we spent just essentially shopping, going around town, buying little tidbits, fruit, vegetables, but more importantly, jewelry, junk jewelry that we just spent most of our time trying out. So it was a fun little walk down. And it's full of tourists, so every single shopkeeper there wants to sell you something because, he expects that, you're going to pick up a souvenir. So the prices are 5 times what they really would be anywhere else, and you can definitely find the original goods in a better, in any store actually, outside of the main street. So as I was telling you guys, so the original royal family comes from this place called Amer. So this is Pooja and I standing in front of the Amer fort, and quickly show you. Oops, skipping the story. Yeah, so this is Amer fort proper, approaching from the reverse side. This is the only fortress in India never to have been taken by any Mughal or other ruler. It stands as the only such fort for over 100 years. And the original kings of Jaipur weren't very wealthy. They were sort of fairly fierce warriors. So they signed sort of a partnership with the Mughals, and the agreement was that they would go around, fighting for the Mughals, and any loot they took for the victories they had would be theirs for the keeping. So essentially, what started out as a small principality grew into this fairly large, powerful dynasty with lots of money being spent on their own fortress and palaces. Fairly imposing structure, quite pretty. Currently maintained by the ASI, we're doing a decent job of maintaining it. This is a view of the original palace before they became sort of vassals of the Mughals. What you see in the background here is essentially the little, Haveli, if you want to call it, where Raja Man Singh grew up. He was the one who partnered with the Mughals, became their chieftain. I don't know if too many people know the story of Maharana Pratap, but Maharana Pratap was the king of Mewar, and he fought the Mughals essentially to his dying breath. And Raja Man Singh allied with the Mughals and was the one who sort of took on Maharana Pratap and chased him out from Chittorgarh to Udaipur. The founding of Udaipur is that's the story of Udaipur. In any case, so you get an idea from where they started to where they went. So this is the courtyard. The movie Jodha Akbar was shot here. Pretty cool. They painted the place, made it look pretty. Put a lot of effort in for the movie. This again is the entrance to the actual palace section of the citadel. It's called Ganesh Pol. It's extremely pretty. I don't know if you guys can see any resemblance, but the architecture of this period is very similar to the architecture you'll see in Agra Fort or in the Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal, of course, being sort of the most exquisite version of what you see here. But a lot of the marble that went for the Taj and a lot of the stone that went for the construction there was quarried in Rajasthan from the quarries of the Jaipur Maharaja, and a lot of that can be seen in his own palace. So yeah,
It's interesting. I think a few things reminded me too of Mysore palaces too, because I think it had mirror work, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of mirror work. The Mysore Palace, of course, is much newer. It's less than 100 years old, or now 100 years old.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so this is from the period of 1650 approximately, and before that. So 1550 to 1650 it was the construction of these things.
The other interesting thing that stood out to me, I'm sure you have more photos around it, but was just the actual location of the fort. It was very carefully chosen, right? Just the rivers, the mountains around it made it really hard to approach.
Yeah, so I think you can get a bit of a view of that from here. So what you see in the foreground is the main courtyard where the sort of the troops would assemble, and this is actually, so to give you a better description of the location, right? Amer Fort has three major forts, one by the other. Amer is the locality, is the location, the village, and they have Jaigarh Fort and Nahargarh Fort. So Jaigarh Fort is the actual sort of garrison, and it is at the pinnacle of the mountain range, or sort of the hillocks on which this is set up. And the village or the township is in the valley, and they have this fortification, which you can see in the background here, running all around on the ridge, on the top of the ridge. And the Jaigarh Fort occupies the absolute top of this hillock. So which essentially means is that they occupies the vantage. And the Amer Fort, what you see here in the foreground, is more sort of the in peacetime citadel. In times of war, they would evacuate from here into Jaigarh Fort, which occupied the heights and was impregnable essentially because of, like you said, the location and of them occupying not only the high ground but having a fortification running around on the ridge of all the hills, with only one small pass being the opening into the plains. So yeah, it's a very well fortified, and it received siege from Aurangzeb, and he didn't eventually win, and his successors as well. So ultimately, it was never won in war. I mean, sorry, never won over or never taken over in war. They, voluntarily allied with the Mughals to avoid such a situation in any case. I'll try and show you another picture, but here you can see the fortification that's running at the top of the ridge, and this, in fact, this water that you see in the foreground was actually never used for drinking. It was just sort of landscaping. So yeah, so here you can see sort of what they call the Devane arm. This is where the king would hold darbar for the general public and courtiers and visiting dignitaries, etc. This is a close-up view of the Ganesh pole. So it's here, unlike in the Taj, where you can see essentially inlay work of stone. Here you see painting or frescoes. These are all painted with vegetable dye, and these are the original paintings from sort of. They have been preserved by the archaeological survey as best they can. They haven't restored or sort of touched them up, so it's quite incredible. It's held out quite well. Of course, the portions where you can see when people are walking by, they become dirty and blackened. The portions that are higher up are much sort of in better shape. You can see the kind of work that they've got here. So this is another section inside. It's sort of hard to capture the extent and the sort of the layout of the place, but as you enter, you sort of have different sections, and you enter what they call the Moti Mahal. This is essentially a sort of set of rooms which are completely covered with glass, convex and concave glass, and it sort of is white marble with glass inlaid inside, and these are apartments for the king. His essentially what they call the winter apartments. The theory goes, and I don't know how much credence to give it, but the theory was that they would light small fires inside, and the heat would be sort of kept or trapped inside the building by the collection of glass and the marble and the thickness of the walls. So it would keep the apartments warm in winter. Jaipur get very cold in winter, especially because it's a semi-arid region, like a desert, and it's northern latitude. But it's extremely pretty, and as usual, Indians being sort of the horrible tourists that they are, were destroying a lot of the actual inlay work. So now we're no longer allowed to go inside and actually see the place. We can only see it from the outside. So what you see here is a view out from one of the apartments. It is looking down into what essentially are the servants' quarters. This is where all the attendants would live, and they would come around to service the king and the royalty while they were up there. There's another view looking out toward the fortifications and the rear of the palace compound. Preserved door. So this is made of ivory. Each piece there is ivory inlaid into wood. It's behind a glass sort of case right now. And this RV is what you were talking about. This is the one passageway of the village leading out into the valley, and you can see the fortification running along the ridge again there, just in the background.
Yeah, I thought that was quite exceptional, the way that had been planned and laid out. Very impressed.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. In fact, Jaipur, it's not as obvious the kind of layout that they have here and the fortification. The most impressive, sort of obvious to the naked eye version is in Chittorgarh and in Jodhpur, where you can actually see the entire fort sitting on top of what is sheer cliff faces, and absolutely no way of sort of laying siege to that. You'll see, we actually visited that, and you'll see photos of that further down. So you can see the high walls, and as you know, we're just discussing, the approach would be very, very difficult. And that's the shop. You can see a bit of the shopping from the previous day. The Jaipuri umbrella that Pooja was carrying around. Oh, and, by the way, all of these photos are on an iPad, so with HDR, so you can see why the the foreground RV has come with and the background has come through.
Yes.
So, so I was telling you about the three forts, right? So Jaigarh, Amer, and Nahargarh. So Jaigarh was the military battalion, was where it was garrisoned. Nahargarh was a fort that essentially is on the edge of the cliff face towards Jaipur city, while Amer is nestled inside the fortifications. So, you know, essentially by the time the Brits had taken over and the Jaipur royal family didn't really need to worry about sort of safety in the sense of war and sort of keeping safe. There was obviously, you know, it was not zero, but it was sufficient freedom of movement that they established a new set of palaces in Nahargarh Fort, which overlooked Jaipur city, and essentially built them in a European style, 13 apartments built inside this little fortress. So what you see is the entrance to those apartments, and this is sort of the courtyard. So each one of these doors leads into one of the 13 apartments, each apartment having like literally a 3 BHK arrangement, you know. Each had their own hall and their own bedrooms and kitchen, etc. For each, I think, the brothers and sort of the minor royal family, minor sort of constituents of the royal family. And this is where they lived while the king himself lived in Jaipur proper. Despite the fact that it was for the minor constituents of the royal family, incredible frescoes and artwork on the inside. And this is a view from Nahargarh looking out into Jaipur. So for those who do visit Jaipur, they always say that you should try and catch a sunset from Nahargarh because it's extremely beautiful. You essentially see the sun setting across the horizon. On the one side, you see the palaces, and the other side, you see Jaipur city, and the sun in another direction. So it's extremely pretty. And you can see the fortification there. And all the fortifications there on the top of the heights to control. One little story from this. So again, as is usual, the Jaipur royal family during the 1857 mutiny, they essentially allied with the British and gave their local resident and the families of the British officials in Jaipur safety by housing them in the Nahargarh fort. They evacuated the low-lying areas and had them here. Jaipur actually didn't get attacked during the mutiny, and it stayed out of the fight, but they essentially continued to ally with the Brits while the mutiny was going on. Mutiny or the First War of Independence, whichever way you want to look at it. So, I'll be honest and say that we spent the next day in Jaipur shopping, and what we shopped for I can't even remember anymore. But it was a fun day. We saw lots and lots of really great textiles and handicrafts. It's at really great prices. But what we actually bought, I think I'll let Pooja answer that next time. So our trip after that was to this place that's between Jaisalmer and Jodhpur. It's a desert, a camp out in the middle of a desert. So our approach to the camp was on this jeep. You could call it a little jeep safari, but it was quite a fun little exercise because we thought we'd see pure sand dunes, but what we ended up seeing was what you see in front of you. Essentially, the sand dunes have a lot of shrubbery growing because they've had great rain for the last 5 years. Every single year, they've had better than expected rain, and they've got shrubbery like this growing all over what is essentially sand dunes and desert. All right, so this is fairly high dune, and you can see as we come down on the jeep. It's quite a bit of fun to sort of drive around. I'll actually play a little clip. I hope this comes through. Okay, not a very great clip, but essentially a very rocky ride. And as we sort of crested the hill, we came to this little shelter where we got a camel ride through the rest of the trip. So the rest of the way to the actual desert camp. It was a very cool approach to our night halt. And there you have it. That's the desert camp nestled in the sort of the bottom of a sand dune. And we got to stay in one of those tents over there.
Beautiful.
Luxury, yeah, it's a luxury tent. I will admit it had all the amenities you could ask for, so I really wasn't roughing it in any way. But yeah, it is quite spectacular actually.
Well, for next time, I'm sure this.
Yeah, so there you see. Yeah, it was really great. I mean, it was a clear moon night, full moon actually, not a single cloud in the sky, and I don't think we have any pictures at night because the cameras really couldn't take it, but it is spectacular scenery, and oh, there is a picture. So, very cool breeze. It was set up very beautifully by the the team that they had there. They had these little lanterns set up all along at intervals throughout the campsite, and you navigated using those little lanterns. And they had a Rajasthani folk troupe perform at night. There was no bonfire because not quite cold enough for that, but this absolutely spectacular uh, meal that we had there. I think you can see the big tent here. It's where we had our dinners and lunches, etc. And they had every kind of delectable meat, from lal mas, which is one of the best delicacies of the region in terms of non-vegetarian food. It's essentially lamb slow cooked for about 6 hours in this tomato sort of based curry, and it's incredibly tender, incredibly tasty. It's had with bati, which is I don't know. Pooja will tell me better, but it's essentially sort of flour made into like a laddu with lots and lots of ghee, and churma, which is essentially sweet sweetened flour with sugar crystals or something in there.
I think it's got some jaggery or something in it.
Yeah, so yeah, it's fantastic, and we had lots of other sort of dishes there, but that was the highlight, and it just fantastic vegetarian food as well. They had this thing called sangar ki sabzi, which is sort of it's a plant that's grown in the desert, so extremely nice food, extremely rich as well. So, I mean, this is sort of a sort of something I'd recommend that everybody do as the highlight of our trip. Although we spent only one night and a day there, it is sort of serene. There's not a single sound you can hear of anything except for peacocks and a few birds around there. There is complete solitude, and on a full moon night, we could see for pretty far with the naked eye. And with the setup that they have going there, you could essentially retire with really awesome meal, great drinks, and watching. You literally feel like a king watching the show. So moving on, we returned from the desert camps, which is called Samsara, to Jodhpur city proper. And what you see here is sort of rooftop. We were at a rooftop restaurant, and we got to see this view of the Mehrangarh Fort, which is the fort in Jodhpur. And Jodhpur is the capital of what is called the Marwar region, M-A-R, Marwar, not Mewar, which is W-M-E-R, starts with M-E. So the difference is that Marwar is sort of the name from which Marwadi derives. It's essentially the largest principality in physical area of Rajasthan, and most people who speak Marwadi derive some sort of lineage from this area. Now, again, the Marwadis that we typically speak to or meet in daily life are not the Rajputs. They're typically the trading community, which in I guess we call Banyas in India. They are the ones who essentially, in sort of the times of the Mughals, attached themselves to the armies as they traveled on their conquests, and were the traders who traveled with the army. And as they moved across the country, they settled in different locations and essentially became residents of the area, would continue to speak the language of their home country or their home principality. And that's essentially the history of the Marwadis as we know them. The actual true Marwadi is a dialect of Rajasthani, which again is very similar to Gujarati. They're all there are essentially 4 or 5 different dialects that are spoken in the region. So Jaipur dialect is slightly different from the dialect of Jodhpur to the dialect of Udaipur. And interestingly enough, till very recently, Rajasthani was not actually recognized as an official language of Rajasthan. It was Hindi. I would not have known that. So you can actually get by speaking Hindi everywhere. Continuing on. So yeah, another nice picture. So we had sort of planned our trip in such a way that we could be in Jodhpur during this music festival called Jodhpur Riff. And the first morning we were there was the beginning of the festival. And the arrangement was such that they held each of the events at some sort of location that was sort of part of the fort complex. So what you're seeing here is the fort in the background, and we're sitting in a place called Jaswant Tada. Essentially, we were listening to a group of Meghwals, who are traditional Rajasthani folk singers, and this is before dawn. So we got there at something like 5 in the morning, and till about 7:38, they sort of sang typically Kabir ke Dohe, Mirabai songs, and it was really magical, very well organized, and they sang. They had some acoustic setup, but a lot of it you could hear just their plain vocals, and it was a beautiful way to bring in the morning sunrise. Fabulous music. Oh, and talking about photography, I think SLRs have become so common that half the crowd was carrying SLRs there, and as soon as the sun started to rise, everybody sort of started getting up, and although they were listening to music, they were taking photographs of the sunrise and of the scenery, and half of them had forgotten about the music, and half of them were still listening while taking photographs. It was quite funny to watch the whole spectacle. So this is the actual entrance to the fort. As you can see, fairly tall walls. I'll try and show you another picture of this before we come to this. Come back. Okay, not. All right, I'll try and show you another one. But the fort is essentially sitting on this huge cliff face on the other side. And the approach to this is via one narrow pathway, which is garrisoned by almost 3 or 4 different fortifications. And the other sides are all cliff faces. It's nearly impossible to climb up. And although it doesn't look very large from this view, the fort has a sort of perimeter of more than 7 or 8 kilometers, and a huge amount of surface area enclosed inside. It's got its own water tank, food growing area, and garrison for the army. So this is one of the forts that also held out for the longest period. It did get it did lose to Akbar, if I'm not wrong. That was the only one time it lost, but I think that was also because of internal treachery, where they sort of ran out of food, or it was I think I can't remember the exact story, but essentially it was some sort of deceit from the inside that allowed the fort to be taken. And these are the ramparts that you see. The fort is not being maintained by the ASI, but being maintained by the royal family themselves. It's called the Mehrangarh Museum Trust and Foundation, which runs the place, and they've done a fairly good job of maintaining it. So this is one of the entrances. That's me standing there in front of it. You can still see the frescoes that have been painted out in the front. This is actually the second gate going inside. So this is a true citadel where the palace and the fort complex are nearly indistinguishable from one another. There are literally, hundreds of apartments on the inside for various functionaries and various purposes. And there are multiple levels of fortification. Jodhpur is called the Blue City. I think I just saw a hint of that from here. Try and show you another picture of that. So we didn't actually end up exploring the actual fort on the first day we were there. We just sort of took a tour around, so circumnavigated it, and spent the day in town. Our cousins had joined us because there were so many music events going on. The evening was a Sufi music night, and out in the middle of sort of with the fort in the background, in an open area of one of the parks, they had organized all-night Sufi event, and people from all ages were there throughout the night listening to these guys singing without a mic, without any acoustic setup, with the fort in the background on a full moon night. It was absolutely beautiful. There you go. See these guys. All right. So like I said, we didn't actually see the fort that day. We went instead to see the Umaid Bhawan Palace. And those who don't know, Umaid Bhawan is sort of probably the first or second royal property to be converted into a hotel. It's one of the largest palaces in India, larger than everything except Rashtrapati Bhavan. And it's much the same style as Rashtrapati Bhavan. So what you see here, the sort of museum piece, the interior of the palace, very European in style and taste because it was built in the 1920s. Ostensibly as a make work program because there was a famine going on. So the Jodhpur royal family spent considerable amount of money in essentially creating employment and you know, giving work to the local industry. That's the current Maharaja and his wife, Jug Singh, I think his name is. Gaj Singh, sorry. I think, oh, so this is an interesting piece. So one of the halls, one of the rooms in the main palace has these murals painted to depict stories from the Ramayana. I don't know if you can make out very well from this photo, but it's fairly dark inside. The painting was done by a Polish artist who did this entire painting in a very Art Deco style. And so, you know, it's almost like seeing a sort of caricatured, Europeanized view of the sort of the Ramayana from these walls is actually quite spectacular. And the entire restoration of these panels have been paid for by the Polish government because he's a famous Polish painter. Quite funny. Our government hasn't paid for anything. You can see, and that's the actual palace, Umaid Bhawan. As tourists are not allowed to go inside unless we're actually staying at the Taj. So we only get to see the museum wing and admire it from the outside. Oh, beautiful castle.
It's not a Taj property?
Yeah, the whole palace is a Taj property. It's Taj Umaid Bhawan.
ITC.
Sorry?
Is it ITC or Taj?
No, Taj. It's a Taj property. So I can understand that they wouldn't allow tourists in because they charge 60,000 rupees a night to stay there, and you can't have, you know, every Tom, Dick, and Harry walking around when the entire point of exclusivity.
So if it's a Taj property, why should the government though support the maintenance?
Oh no! So the Taj property, the Taj pay for maintenance of all the area that is under their sort of, let's say, under their keep. But there are large sections of it which are sort of open to public viewing, which are the mural areas. So which are not part of the Taj. And that sort of comes under the ASI.
Okay.
Or Pooja's correcting me, not the ASI, but the Mehrangarh Trust. The Taj, okay, so we got a small glimpse of the Taj area. It definitely looked much, much better than the areas that were part of the museum. It was in much, much better shape. So they're definitely doing a great job at keeping that going.
Hey, you should invite Pooja to join the call.
She's about to leave. She's been correcting me while she's working.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I don't know why this is stuck. Hold on. Yeah, so there you see it. So the Maharaja Jodhpur, Gaj Singh, as usual, most Maharajas love their car collections, and there are plenty of them. So he is one of the few who actually likes to take his cars for the international vintage car collection that takes place at Pebble Beach. And they had a small selection available for viewing here. So what you see is a Rolls-Royce Phantom. This is an Austin limousine. This is a Packard. It's huge. I mean, you can't make out from this photograph how big it is, but it's as you know those sort of modern day limousines that fly in America. It's as big as that. It's just huge.
Like a stretch limo.
Yeah, except it doesn't look like a stretch limo because it's just so tall. It's so wide. It's really big.
Looks a bit ugly though, if you ask me.
I think the photo's not doing it justice.
Mm.
And there you go, Packard. Number of cylinders, 8-cylinder engine.
So this hotel, I mean, so all this sort of happened after the Privy Purse was taken away. The whole
No, the Gaj Singh and even the Jaipur royal family converted their property into Taj hotels very early. They did it in the 50s and 60s before the Privy Purse was abolished. The Privy Purse, of course, when it went away, caused them a lot more harm, but still they sort of survived it. But they were amongst the first to do it. The Jaipur royal family being the first to do it. So this is a Buick Straight 8, very pretty car.
It's a nice picture.
Yeah, it's fun. And we're back to the fort. So this is the actual main event. There was one of these every night at inside the fort. So inside the courtyard, off at the top of the hill, they had set up an event for various artists, international as well as Indian, to come and perform. And they had a huge fusion arrangement. They had Tawfiq Qureshi and his group playing Indian classical, followed by a group of Meghwals playing along with a jazz band, followed by a Yemenis blues band. And it was fabulous. The acoustics were great. The setting was beautiful. The photograph just does not do it justice. And it was really great music. So I've come back to the fort, but I don't have pictures to show you, but the entire palace apartments were decorated with the sound and light show, and they had food being served, and they had lots of food and drinks available. So people were having a fantastic time. You're literally living like royalty out there. This is the fort again. So this is our actual tour inside the fort. I won't spend too much time, but this is sort of the main gate, the third gate as you go inside. And this is built in such a way that elephants can go up, but it's also designed in a ways that it cannot be sieged, because a battering ram will not fit. So the door is hidden behind this entrance. So you see the curve, and the door is behind that. So no siege engine could approach it, no battering ram could approach it, and elephants, even if they tried, would not be able to run up the passageway and then ram into the doorway, because there was just too little space for them to turn and carry their weight through. So this door essentially has never fallen, except by being opened from the inside, ironically enough. And although it sounds pretty horrible, but these spikes that you see on the door were to prevent an elephant from battering the door down. It would essentially go through the elephant's skull. So now comes the sad part. These handprints that you see here are essentially carvings of the handprints left behind by the women of the royal family, who would essentially paste their handprints on the walls before they committed Johar. So Johar being the tradition, or not even the tradition, essentially the action of the women committing suicide in the event that the army was known to be losing. So essentially the men and the armed forces being out fighting. This is essentially in the time of the invasion of the Mughals and the period before that. And when it was clear that they were going to lose, instead of suffering the fate of not just capture, but essentially what we see of befalling the Yezdis, falling into slavery and worse, sexual exploitation, etc. They thought it better that they would, commit suicide, and this is sort of the last imprint of those women, which has been sort of carved into the walls itself. Some of the stories of where this sounds like a very horrible tradition, but it apparently only occurred on a few occasions, especially when they were about to lose, and it was sort of a story, or not story, but a lesson hard learned, because in previous times when they had lost, the women had, or the families had suffered fairly excruciating losses of a variety of, brutal assaults, etc. So moving on from there, what you see is sort of the inner walkway past the apartments in the palace. So this is extremely well maintained. It's been maintained by the Mehrangarh Fort Trust, which is run by the Maharaja himself. And the apartments are in fairly good shape. They're extremely beautiful, incredible amount of carving. And there are a variety of different uses each building has, from some of them being quarters for officers, some of them being one of them being the treasury, and this actually is the courtyard of Zenana, where the ladies would live in these apartments, and they had these glass jalis through, not glass, sorry, stone jalis through which they could see the going-ons of the courtyard without being seen on the outside. This is a museum of the howdahs of the elephants that they rode, and lots of paintings and murals on the inside. Lots of silver and gold everywhere. So this is actually a palki captured from Gujarat. It's Gujarati in origin and in craftsmanship, completely gold inlaid, and captured in one of the wars that they fought. Textiles. So Jodhpur is still a major center for textiles, or traditional textiles. Jodhpuri breeches and Jodhpurs, that is the jacket, etc., are famous for having been invented in Jodhpur. I don't know if you guys know what a toran is, but this is a toran. This is used in Hindu marriages. at least in North India. And this is a fairly ornate one. Musket, weaponry. Hookah, silver. We won't get that at Mocha. So they have a very nice audio-visual guide. So you can like some of the more sort of more European or Western folks who don't understand English can take an audio guide along, and it will sort of give you in multiple languages. It's extremely well done. One of the best museums, or one of the best ways a museum has been set up in India that I've seen at one of these royal palaces or forts. It's one of the most extensive art collections or traditional art collections in the country, including textiles. This is all gold inlay work on a carpet. Or I'm sorry, this is a ceiling. I don't know what to call it, a rug or a canopy. They call it a canopy. And that's another Sheesh Mahal. Except this one is inside an apartment and was one of the king's bedchambers. This is the Diwan-e-Khas, or the darbar for the private audiences. You can still see the gold inlay work throughout. Incredible amount of carving. Weapons. And this is a view out. You can see Umaid Bhawan Palace far away in the background. The Jodhpur king, the Rathors, actually occupied Mehrangarh Fort throughout, right up to the 1920s when they built Umaid Bhawan. So this is actually has been a living palace right up to this period. This is one more of the king's bedchambers. I don't know what those golden disco balls are doing up there. But... And there you see. This is just one view of what they call the Jaipur, the blue city, because all the walls were painted blue. The story goes that the blue is it works really well to keep the heat out, but there seems to be some other part of tradition mixed up in there, and no one had a very good explanation as to what it was. So you can see sort of the innards of the fort complex. It's quite large. And large sections of it are still under the occupation of the royal family. It's a private property. Ivory again. Gold.
Yeah, just a quick time check. Looks like we might have to almost split this into two parts, right?
I'm actually wrapping. This is the end of the whole thing.
Cool, all right. I mean, this is great. I mean, if we need to do two parts, we could.
No, I'm actually, this is the end of it. So just going through the photographs inside the fort. And these are, just cradles for the kids. Me posing for cradles for kids. I don't know why. So this sort of repetition of what you'd seen earlier. So because of the festival, there were musicians throughout the buildings playing traditional music, and it was it made the ambience quite nice actually. You could almost sort of take yourself back a bit.
The tour with the background music.
Yeah, tour with background music. It's almost like you're in a TV serial or something. So yeah, it's an incredibly pretty place, and it's totally worth visiting. I think that's the end of the whole thing. And I mean, I think there's tons more to do in Rajasthan. The only thing I resolved at the end of this trip was that I have to go back, and go back with take a car and drive around Rajasthan. You could spend 21, 31, 51 days there and not get bored, or at least someone like me. Lots of great food, great hospitality, fabulous places to see, lots of history, and very intriguing history. So I'll wrap it up there.
Great stuff, man. Good.
Yeah, great pictures, amazing trips.
Yeah, really nice. You also had another young audience.
Yeah. Rishi.
Oh, awesome!
In some of those
An
things.
early introduction to Rajasthan there, Rishi.
Hey, nice. Hi, Rishi.
Okay, that's his note.
Ha 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 ha. Hey, Aditya, so I thought when you got to the later part of your photo tour, I was expecting to see some pictures of some interesting rock climbing type pictures, climbing your way out of a deep pit of some sort,
Oh,
maybe with or without a rope. But
oh, that's a good allusion. Yes. So Merangar was the location for where they shot A Dark Knight Rises. Interestingly enough, the stepwell that they show you is not in Jodhpur. The background.
Okay.
And he climbed that.
Yeah. So we climbed the fort. If I could climb those walls, RV, I think I'd qualify for quite a cool commander. I think those walls have held up to a lot of fairly good siege engines, and yeah. So it's yeah, the Rathors are probably the only sort of one of the few that lost only once or twice, and you can see cannonball marks throughout on the walls where they made this little dent in the wall and nothing really happened after that, and it's held out except for the one time I told you, and the only group to have consistently and forever resisted in the Rajput clan is the Mewar, who sort of had to abandon Chittorgarh, which was their home, and had to sort of retreat to Udaipur, and that's when they set up this principality. So it's fairly rich history, lots to learn, lots to see.
So the actual pit was not in Rajasthan, or was it somewhere else in Rajasthan?
Oh no, it's somewhere else in Rajasthan.
Okay, okay.
They juxtapose the two.
Mm.
There's an incredibly beautiful one near Jaipur. It's about 40 kilometers from Jaipur.
Got it.
These are essentially step wells, what they showed there.
Yeah.
Step well. So
it's interesting with the scene where he sort of comes out of the pit. The view of the fort that you see you don't see any of the other buildings. So I presume this is sort of on the other side and not on the city.
Yeah. So actually, the place where they had the Sufi music festival, that part of it was looking from the same viewpoint as the movie was shot.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it's actually, if not the largest, one of the largest forts in India.
Wow.
Actually, Red Fort probably is, Gwalior Fort, Red Fort are probably about as big or bigger, but this is one of the biggest.
Yeah, I think the Red Fort, from what I've heard, is supposed to have been the biggest, especially since I think a major part of the Red Fort was, I think, demolished by the British, right? After the
Uh,
mutiny.
yeah, so actually what they demolished was, so it's funny, the Red Fort had two parts to it, an outer boundary and an inner boundary.
Yeah.
So the outer boundary sort of encompassed the Chandni Chowk area and the entire Shahjahanabad town itself.
Mm.
So what they demolished was a large part of Shahjahanabad.
Okay.
But the inner fort is still sort of under the occupation of the Indian Army.
Got it. So this is after the mutiny, right? The demolition. That's
Yeah.
what
Correct. So the history, I mean, is very interesting. Once I get into the history, I won't bore everybody with it, but lots of little fun facts.
Yeah, and it's but the little thing I just want to mention, which I found very interesting, is I mean you sort of read about it, but I think right at the start, right, the Jaipur, the textile tour sort of thing that you do, where you go into that area and you go through and see all the clothes.
Yeah.
Fascinating in itself, just seeing the clothes that they wore. Part of the tour also included the whole Jodhpuri thing, right? The whole polo clothing, which comes from sort of the lower garments that they wear, which then got popular in Britain and now known as the Jodhpurs. But that is interesting.
Yeah. So the fun story behind that is it actually was invented in Jodhpur.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
So
and the polo team was one of the best teams that they had, right? So
yeah, so the Jodhpur polo team was one of the best polo teams in the world.
yeah.
And the current king's father, Gaj Singh's father, was the man who was the head of the polo team, the captain. And when his daughter got married to Savai Mansingh II, that is the king of Jaipur, he gave the polo team as a gift and dowry as part of the wedding. And that's when the Jaipur polo team became really famous, because essentially the Jodhpur polo team became the Jaipur polo team. And Man Singh was extremely successful as himself as a polo player and won all those awards in Britain, etc. And it sort of became, the Jodhpuris became synonymous with Man Singh, even though they came from Jodhpur. And by the way, a lot of the Taj hotels across the country have the polo room. It's because their first hotel property in Rajasthan was the Rambagh Palace in Jaipur, which has a polo room inspired by Savai Man Singh, and they've carried it forward to a lot of their other properties.
Nice.
I didn't show a picture of Rambagh Palace. We went there for a dinner one evening, but Rambagh Palace is gorgeous. It's also, or at least to me, it looked like the inspiration for the Leela Palace in Bangalore, the hotel. And it's one of the prettiest places I've seen.
Did you guys make it out to Ajmer or Pushkar?
No. We didn't go anywhere as far as that. So we were just at these three locations: Jaipur, Jodhpur, and the desert camp close to Jaisalmer. So yeah, that's why my resolution that the next thing to do in Rajasthan is to go back and spend like 21 or 30 days there.
Yeah, and then there's Udaipur and Jaisalmer, and it's just a huge state, right? It takes a while to even get around.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost a 4.5-5 hour drive. Just between Jaisalmer and Jodhpur, and they're the closer two together. And then Udaipur is much further away. There's Bikaner, there's Ajmer, there's Pushkar, there's Mount Abu, there's Ocean, there's tons of places to see.
Hey, great, phenomenal photos, great walkthrough, Aditya. Thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.